The first slice across my meadow looked like a wound, fresh, ugly, and deliberate. Bright orange flags danced in the morning wind like taunts, leading my eye to a trench I never approved and a coil of safety pipe glinting like a snake in the Sunday. That land is my spine, my breath, my proof that I built a life on my own terms. Yet overnight strangers cut it open and stamped a logo where my name should be. When I called the HOA, the president's voice was sugared poison. It's for the community. Funny community doesn't need forged signatures, midnight engines, and a notary who swears she watched my hand move when I wasn't even in the room. I locked my gate, grabbed my camera, and promised myself one thing: if they wanted a fight, I'd bring a floodlight to their shadows and a paper trail to their lies. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from and your local time. The morning it all began seemed ordinary enough, quiet, crisp, and heavy, with the scent of dew on the long grass. I had woken early as I usually did to brew my coffee and watch the sun rise over the gentle slopes of Redwood County. My 20 acres of rolling land had always been more than just property to me. They were a sanctuary. When I bought it 15 years earlier, I made sure every document spelled out one thing with absolute clarity: this land would never under any circumstance fall under HOA control. I wanted no neighbors telling me how high the grass should be, no fines for the color of my shutters, no self-appointed tyrants knocking at my door. Freedom, that was the real purchase price. So imagine my shock when I stepped onto my porch and saw the blaze of orange flags cutting across my meadow like some kind of neon scar. They were driven into the ground at neat intervals, zigzagging across my property. From a distance, they looked almost festive, as if someone was preparing for a parade. But as I walked closer, my stomach turned. A trench had been carved straight through the center of my field, the soil split open and left gaping. Thick yellow pipes lay coiled and exposed in the dirt, gleaming under the early light. Heavy machinery stood abandoned nearby, their wheels leaving gouges so deep they'd take months of rain to heal. I froze in disbelief. My first thought was that there must have been a mistake. Perhaps the contractors had misread a map or taken a wrong turn down my private gravel road. No one had asked my permission. No letters, no notices, no knock at my door. Nothing. Yet here they were on my land. I crouched beside the trench and touched the cold pipe. It wasn't even buried yet, just left sitting there like a claim staked by someone else. My chest tightened not only from anger but from the sense of violation. This was no minor trespass. This was someone telling me I didn't matter. Then I spotted a sign nailed into a wooden post just a few feet from the trench: Community Safety Initiative Authorized Gas Line Installation. At the bottom, bold letters spelled out the name I dreaded most: Redwood Hills Homeowners Association. And there, stamped like an official decree, was their emblem, a neat little oak tree inside a circle. My mouth went dry. Redwood Hills HOA. They had no jurisdiction over me, never had. When I closed on my property years ago, I specifically paid extra to remain outside their grasp. Yet somehow, they had slithered in during the night and cut my land open as though they owned it. I stormed back to the house, adrenaline pounding in my ears. My phone nearly slipped out of my shaking hands as I dialed the number listed for the HOA office. A receptionist answered her voice flat, as if I had interrupted her morning crossword puzzle. "This is Jackson Cole," I said, my tone sharp but controlled. "There's construction on my property that I never authorized. Who's responsible?" There was a pause on the other end. Papers shuffled. Then, in a disinterested tone, "Yes, Mr. Cole. That's part of the safety improvement project. Gas lines are being modernized across several properties in Redwood Hills to comply with safety standards." I gripped the phone tighter. "My land isn't part of Redwood Hills. I am not under the HOA. You have no right to dig a ditch through my property." Her response was almost bored. "According to our records, we have the owner's signature on file." The words hit me like a slap. My voice cracked with fury. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." "Well, if you have an issue," she said with a click of her tongue, "you'll have to speak with the HOA president, Cassandra Pike. I can transfer you." But after several minutes on hold, the line went dead. Deliberately, I suspected. They wanted me to hang in silence, frustrated and powerless. I wasn't going to let them. I snatched up my truck keys and drove into town, fury coursing through every mile. Redwood Hills HOA kept their office in a small gray building, squeezed between a nail salon and a dry cleaner. Hardly the fortress I had imagined for such brazen thieves. Still, as I pushed open the glass door, the air reeked of stale coffee and smug authority. The receptionist barely looked up when I demanded to see Cassandra. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I snapped, "but I'm not leaving until I speak with her." With a sigh, she made a call. Moments later, a tall woman in a sleek navy suit stepped out from a back office. She looked polished with perfect hair and a smile so rehearsed it might as well have been painted on. "Mr. Cole," she said, warmly extending her hand. "I'm Cassandra Pike, president of Redwood Hills HOA. How can I help you today?" I ignored her hand. "You can start by explaining why there's a trench and a gas line on my property without my permission." Her smile didn't falter. "Ah, yes. The Community Safety Initiative. We're installing new gas lines to ensure reliability and bring everyone into compliance. It's for the greater good." "My property isn't part of your HOA," I shot back. "I made sure of that when I bought it. You have no jurisdiction here." Her eyes gleamed predator-like, though her voice stayed syrupy. "According to updated records, Mr. Cole, your land was incorporated into the association's jurisdiction 2 years ago. And as for authorization, we have your signature on file." My fists clenched. "That signature is a forgery." She tilted her head, her smile stiffening. "Those are serious allegations. If you wish to dispute them, you're welcome to pursue legal channels. In the meantime, the project will proceed." The gall of her, the sheer arrogance, made my blood boil. "You're trespassing. If you don't stop immediately, I'll call the sheriff." Her smile dropped, replaced with a thin blade of warning. "You're welcome to try, but I advise caution before obstructing a project designed for community safety. Interfering could have consequences." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. I turned and walked out before my rage got the better of me. Back in my truck, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. My land, my sanctuary, and now I was being told it belonged to them. As I drove home, a thought burned in my mind: who had forged my signature, and what game was Cassandra Pike really playing? When I reached my driveway, dusk was settling over the hills. I grabbed a flashlight and marched straight to the trench again. The machinery loomed like monsters in the fading light. I scanned the ground until something half-buried caught my eye, a white envelope wedged under one of the orange flags. I pulled it free and brushed off the dirt. The HOA's emblem stared back at me. Inside was a copy of the supposed authorization letter. My name was scrawled across the bottom, a crude imitation of my signature. Anyone familiar with my handwriting would see it instantly. My stomach turned. This wasn't incompetence, it was fraud. I stuffed the document into my jacket and went back inside. On my dining table, I spread out the forged authorization next to my deed. The deed was ironclad, my property was explicitly excluded from the HOA's jurisdiction. No gray area, no loopholes. Yet here was proof they were willing to lie, to forge, to trespass, all to sink their hooks into my land. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring out at the silhouette of the trench under the moonlight. My sanctuary felt invaded, tainted. It wasn't about safety or progress. It was about control, and I swore to myself they had just picked the wrong man to steal from. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my decision was already made. I wasn't about to let Cassandra Pike and her pack of HOA wolves sink their claws into my land without a fight. I called my lawyer, an old friend and tough-as-nails attorney named Marian Torres. Years ago, she'd helped me fend off a shady contractor who tried to extort me. If anyone could sniff out fraud in this HOA mess, it was Marian. When she answered, her voice was calm, steady, and full of that lawyer's edge. "Jackson, slow down," she said after I unleashed a torrent of details. "You're telling me the HOA dug up your field, forged your signature, and claims jurisdiction they've never had?" "Exactly," I spat. "And I've got the forged document in my hand to prove it." Marian went silent for a moment. I could practically hear her sharpening her legal knives through the phone line. Then we hit back hard. Forgery is criminal. Trespass is civil and criminal. They've overstepped every boundary. I'll draft a cease and desist order by the end of the day. In the meantime, document everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. Do not confront them alone. If they return, call me first. Her words steadied me. Finally, I wasn't just a lone man raging against the machine. I had a weapon. But even with Marian on my side, I couldn't shake the pit in my stomach. The HOA had moved boldly, brazenly, and in the dead of night. That wasn't just arrogance, it was strategy. I spent the morning patrolling my property like a soldier on watch. The trench looked even uglier in daylight. Muddy piles of dirt scarred the meadow, and the orange flags seemed to mock me, fluttering in the breeze like pennants of conquest. I photographed every inch, every gouge, every corner of machinery. I measured the trench and marked the location of the so-called gas line. Then I carefully placed the forged letter beside my deed on the kitchen counter and snapped photos side by side. The contrast was damning, one authentic, legally binding the other, a laughable forgery that wouldn't fool a child. Around noon, I drove into Redwood County's records office. The clerk behind the desk, a middle-aged man with horn-rimmed glasses, typed my property information into his computer. His brow furrowed. "Says here your land was annexed into Redwood Hills HOA jurisdiction 2 years ago." My heart skipped. "That's impossible. Show me." He swiveled the monitor so I could see. There, it was a scanned amendment with the HOA's letterhead, my property listed, and my signature at the bottom. It was the same sloppy forgery as the authorization letter notarized by someone named Brenda Holcomb. "That's not my handwriting," I said, my voice sharp. "That's fraud." The clerk leaned in, lowering his voice. "You're not the first landowner to say that. The HOA's been expanding aggressively, annexing properties, pushing through permits. But you're the first I've seen with actual proof of forgery." That only stoked my anger. "So what happens now?" He shrugged helplessly. "You'll need to file a formal dispute with the county. We can flag the amendment for review, but it'll take time." Time. That was exactly what the HOA wanted. They dug in before I could even blink. By the time bureaucracy caught up, they'd have their pipeline laid, their lies cemented into the ground along with it. When I pulled back into my driveway, my truck skidded to a halt. Parked outside my gate was a massive piece of machinery, an excavator, its steel bucket lowered just inches from the chain and padlock I'd installed the night before. It looked like a predator crouching ready to strike. No workers, no supervisors, just the silent threat left there to taunt me. My jaw tightened. Enough was enough. I marched inside, dialed Marian, and described what I'd found. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said grimly. "They want you to feel cornered. Don't give them that satisfaction. I'll have the cease and desist filed by this afternoon, and tomorrow we'll request an injunction. If they keep working, they'll be in contempt of court." Her words were fuel, but fury still bubbled in my chest. That night, I couldn't rest. Every sound outside made me twitch. Tires on gravel, the hum of an engine in the distance. I installed motion sensor lights across the property line and rigged up a makeshift alarm with tin cans strung by wire across the gate. It wasn't much, but it made me feel less like prey. Just after midnight, I heard the faint crunch of tires outside. I crept to the window, lights off, and watched. A black SUV rolled slowly along the edge of my land, headlights off, engine low. It paused near the excavator, then continued circling like a wolf testing the fence. I held my phone in my hand, ready to call 911, but I knew they wanted me to flinch. I let them circle. I let them drive away. But I didn't sleep a vink. Morning came, and with it, escalation. I was sanding a chair in my workshop when I heard engines roar again. I rushed outside and saw 3 trucks parked at my gate. Men in reflective vests and hard hats clustered together, clipboard in hand. One of them yanked at the chain on the gate. "This is private property," I shouted, striding forward. "You're trespassing." The man with the clipboard stepped up. "We're here on behalf of Redwood Hills HOA to continue the gas line installation. You need to remove this gate immediately, or we'll involve law enforcement." The audacity nearly floored me. "You've already broken the law," I barked. "Forgery, trespass, property damage, you name it. If anyone's calling law enforcement, it's me." The man didn't flinch. "We have all necessary permits. Your signature is on file." My voice was steady but laced with fury. "That signature is forged. I've got proof. Touch this gate and you'll regret it." One of the trucks shifted into reverse, edging closer, as if preparing to ram the gate. My pulse spiked. I stepped forward, standing my ground. "If you damage my property, you'll answer for it. I'm warning you." The driver hesitated. The man with the clipboard raised a hand, signaling him to stop. He glared at me coldly. "We'll be back. This isn't over." They turned and drove away, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust. I exhaled, my hands trembling with adrenaline. The second they vanished, I dialed Marian again. "They just tried to force their way in," I told her, voice taut. She sighed heavily. "I knew they'd push like this. But good, you stood your ground. I'll add this incident to the injunction request. The judge won't like that they're ignoring boundaries." By evening, I sat alone in my workshop, the scent of sawdust mixing with tension. I stared at the trench through the window, its jagged line cutting across my meadow like a scar. My sanctuary, my freedom, my life's work, it was under siege. And I realized something chilling. This wasn't just a fight over a pipe. It was war over control, a war the HOA had already decided to win by any means necessary. But they underestimated me. I wasn't a man who gave up his ground. Not to thieves, not to frauds, not to a polished liar like Cassandra Pike. They had started this battle in the shadows. Now I would drag it into the light. The morning after the trucks retreated from my gate, I woke with a knot in my chest that coffee couldn't untangle. My sanctuary had turned into a battleground, and I couldn't shake the thought that the HOA wasn't just testing me, they were laying the groundwork for something much bigger. I spread every document across my dining table. The deed to my land, the forged authorization letter, photos of the trench, the video I'd taken of the trucks threatening my gate. Each piece of evidence glared back at me like weapons waiting to be used. Marion had said to document everything, and I did down to the angle of every orange flag in the dirt. But one piece gnawed at me more than the rest, the notary's name on the forged annexation document, Brenda Holcomb. My gut told me this wasn't some random clerk. So I did what anyone with a half-decent suspicion does. I searched. Sure enough, Brenda wasn't just a notary. She was listed as an HOA board member on their own website. That was no coincidence. A conflict of interest this blatant wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. She had signed off on my consent while also sitting on the board that benefited from it. I forwarded everything to Marion, my lawyer. Within an hour, she called back. "Jackson, this is even bigger than I thought. If a board member notarized forged signatures, we're looking at felony territory. Fraud, conspiracy, you name it. I'll file the cease and desist. Today and tomorrow I'll push for an injunction. But we should also prepare a counterclaim. Trespass, property damage, and harassment. You've got the evidence." Her confidence gave me a flicker of hope, but deep down I knew people like Cassandra Pike and her HOA cronies didn't play by the rules. They weren't going to just pack up their toys and leave because a judge told them to. That night, as I sat in my workshop sanding down the leg of an oak chair, I heard it again, the sound of tires crunching gravel. I killed the light, peered through the window, and watched headlights roll slowly along the edge of my land. A black pickup this time crawling like a vulture. It didn't stop, just lingered long enough to make my skin crawl. By morning, a bright orange notice was stapled to my front gate. My stomach dropped as I read the bold letters, "Zoning violation, unauthorized structures." The notice accused me of building my workshop and greenhouse without permits. It threatened fines and even demolition if I didn't comply. I laughed bitterly. My workshop had been approved and inspected 10 years ago. The greenhouse permitted and stamped by the county itself. This wasn't about zoning. This was retaliation. I tore the notice down and marched straight to my filing cabinet. Out came every permit, every stamped approval, every receipt from the county offices. I made copies, scanned them, and emailed the entire stack to Marion. When I called her, my voice was tight with fury. They're trying to bury me in bogus violations now. She sighed, unsurprised. Classic tactic. They hit you with paperwork and fines until you crack under the weight. But you've got permits. This will backfire. I wanted to believe her, but my gut churned with unease. The HOA wasn't just bending the rules, they were rewriting them as they went. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to meet a neighbor. I trusted an old rancher named Franklin Henders. He'd lived on the edge of Redwood County for 40 years and had fought his own quiet battles against the HOA. Over coffee at a diner, he leaned close and told me what he knew. They tried the same thing with me 10 years ago. Franklin said, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug, claimed my cattle pens violated setback requirements, hauled me into hearings, slapped me with fines. I held out for a year before I finally sold 5 acres just to make them stop. Thought I was the only one. But looking at what you're facing, Jackson, they're getting bolder. I clenched my jaw. Why hasn't anyone stopped them? Because most folks don't have the fight in them, he said simply. HOAs wear you down. But you've got something most don't proof. And guts. When I left the diner, Franklin pressed a folded paper into my hand. It was his old HOA correspondence letters threatening fines, demands for compliance, photos of his cattle pens. They matched the language in my zoning violation notice almost word for word. Back home, I spread Franklin's papers alongside mine. The patterns were obvious. The HOA ran on intimidation and fraud, dressing it up as community improvement. And if Franklin's story was any indication, they'd been getting away with it for decades. That evening, a new envelope arrived in my mailbox. This one wasn't orange, it was white thick and embossed with the letterhead of a law firm. I opened it slowly, my hands shaking. The letter accused me of obstructing a public safety project and demanded $75 0 damages for delays caused by my cease and desist order. $75,000 for daring to protect my own land. The tone of the letter was smug, almost taunting, as if daring me to fight back. I called Marion immediately. She read the letter silently, then let out a humorless laugh. They're bluffing. They want to scare you into backing down. But what they don't realize is they just handed us more ammunition. This is harassment, plain and simple. We'll file a counterclaim and include this. Her calmness steadied me, but rage still burned in my chest. It wasn't just about me anymore. They had done this to Franklin. Who else? How many people had been bullied into giving up land, paying fines, or bending to their so-called initiatives? That night I sat at my desk with a yellow legal pad and wrote out a list. Neighbors I knew, landowners on the outskirts, anyone who might have been touched by the HOA's creeping expansion. If they thought I was going to stand alone, they were dead wrong. By the time I went to bed, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was war against an HOA that had grown too arrogant, too corrupt, too ruthless to stop on its own. And if Cassandra Pike thought a forged signature was enough to break me, she was about to learn what happens when you corner a man on his own land. The day after the $75,000 demand letter arrived, I decided I wouldn't let Cassandra Pike and her cronies keep the fight in the shadows. If they wanted a battle, I'd drag every one of their schemes into the open. By mid-morning, the rumble of engines came again. This time, 4 trucks lined up outside my gate. Their engines idled like beasts waiting to pounce. A dozen men in reflective vests milled around. Some leaned against their trucks, others fiddled with clipboards. I counted 2 heavy rigs with pipe spools strapped to their beds, the kind used for large-scale installations. I walked calmly toward the gate, camera in hand. My heart thudded, but I kept my voice steady. This is private property. You're trespassing. There is a court order in place. The man in charge, broad-shouldered, with a sunburned neck, stepped forward. His voice was flat. We've got authorization. You need to remove this gate, Mr. Cole, or we'll do it ourselves. I raised my camera higher, making sure to capture his face. You so much as touch that chain and you'll be personally liable. Forged documents don't grant access. His eyes narrowed, but before he could answer, another figure emerged from the crowd. A woman in her late 40s, sharp-featured, holding a clipboard. My gut twisted when I saw the name tag, Brenda Holcomb, the notary who had witnessed my forged signature. She smiled with a lawyer's polish. Mr. Cole, I see you're documenting today's progress. Transparency is important in projects like these. I nearly laughed. Transparency? You forged my name. You've trespassed on land that never belonged to you. That's not transparency, it's fraud. Her smile didn't flicker. I'm afraid you're mistaken. The HOA has all necessary permissions. If you'd like, we can schedule a meeting with President Pike to clear up your confusion. I stepped closer, pressing my phone's record button. You're violating a court order right now. Keep talking, Brenda. Every word is evidence. Her eyes hardened, the smile evaporating. Be careful, Mr. Cole. Interfering with a public safety project carries serious consequences. I'd hate to see this escalate. With that, she turned and snapped her fingers. The workers packed up trucks, revved, and the convoy retreated in a cloud of dust. I exhaled shakily, replaying every second of the encounter in my mind. They weren't just pushing, they were probing, testing how far I'd go. That night I sat with Marion in her office downtown, the glow of her desk lamp illuminating stacks of papers. I played the video of Brenda's smug warning. Marion scribbled notes furiously. She admitted presence on your land despite the cease and desist, Marion said. And she's the same notary on the forged annexation. That's damning. We're adding criminal fraud and contempt of court to our filings. I nodded, but unease gnawed at me. It's more than a gas line. The pipe isn't residential grade. It's industrial metal casing reinforced. And when I pried open a panel, I saw wiring inside. Wires, Marion. No gas line has wiring. Her pen stopped mid-scratch. She looked up sharply. Wiring. That means monitoring or data transmission. Jackson, this isn't about utilities. They're running something else through your property. Her words sent a chill down my spine. My instincts had been right. This was bigger than gas. The following morning, I woke to find yet another orange notice nailed to my gate. This one declared that my greenhouse structure was in violation of county environmental codes. A joke. I'd built it 5 years ago with stamped permits from the county inspector himself. They weren't even trying to hide their retaliation anymore. But by then I had allies. Franklin Henders came by with coffee and grim determination in his eyes. He'd spoken to 3 other landowners who had similar stories, bogus fines, annexation papers that smelled of forgery, intimidation by trucks idling on their driveways. We gathered at my workshop, the air thick with sawdust and outrage, and formed a plan. Individually they pick us off, I said. Together we fight. We'll file affidavits. We'll testify. We'll shine a spotlight so bright the HOA can't squirm away. Franklin slapped the table. Damn right. I've had enough of living scared. That afternoon, Marion drafted affidavits for each of us. One by one, we signed our pens, carving defiance into paper. These weren't just complaints, they were sworn testimonies of harassment, fraud, and abuse of power. But as if sensing our resistance, the HOA struck back harder. At dusk, 2 men in suits arrived in a black sedan. They stepped out calm and calculated, briefcase in hand. I met them at the gate. "Mr. Cole," the taller one began smoothly, "we'd like to offer a resolution. The HOA is prepared to compensate you generously for granting permanent access to your property." I folded my arms. How generous. He opened the briefcase, revealing a neatly typed contract. "A substantial cash settlement. Plus, we'll assist with integrating your land into the community's jurisdiction, increasing its market value." I laughed coldly. "You want me to sell my independence so you can bulldoze my land? Forget it." His tone sharpened. "Fighting us will complicate matters. Consider your options carefully." "Get off my property," I snapped. They exchanged a glance, then retreated, leaving a chill behind. That night, I barely slept. Headlights glowed across the field, circling slowly. They were watching me, testing my resolve. By dawn, I knew one thing for certain: they had escalated from paperwork to psychological warfare. But if Cassandra Pike thought intimidation would break me, she hadn't yet learned what a cornered man will do. With Marion's injunction pending, my neighbor's affidavits in hand, and my evidence piling higher by the day, I felt the tide beginning to turn. The HOA had money, lawyers, and influence. But I had truth fire in my chest, and a community waking up to their lies. And I promised myself the next time they came, it wouldn't just be me standing at the gate. It would be all of us. After the convoy left that last night, I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd left something behind on purpose, a reminder that they could return whenever they liked. I slept in fits, waking to every distant engine, every rustle in the trees. But by sunrise, I was back out at the trench, camera in hand, because the only way to conquer fear was with evidence. I moved slowly along the exposed pipe, following its length like a detective trailing a suspect. The metal casing looked industrial, too thick, too heavy for a residential gas job. At one point, the casing had a small access panel bolted shut with tamper-proof screws. I set my flashlight to inspect it, and with a screwdriver borrowed from the workshop, pried it open. Inside was a neat little junction box, and my stomach dropped when I saw the logo stamped on the module: Meridian Grid. Meridian Grid. The name rang like a warning bell. Marion had mentioned the company before, a private firm that specialized in large infrastructure data hubs and heavy industrial projects. This was no neighborhood utility upgrade. The box contained a cluster of wires and a compact control module with thick shielding and a serial number etched in. There were thin, coaxial cables that ran along the side of the main conduit, the kind used for data transmission, not for gas. I photographed every angle, every label, and the serial number. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. If Meridian Grid was involved, this was no petty HOA scam. This was a corporate play, a pipeline of power and data disguised as community safety. It explained the industrial materials, the hush of lawyers, the brazenness. Money like that doesn't tiptoe in, it bulldozes. Marion called as soon as I uploaded the photos. Her voice had that quiet edge, equal parts excitement and cold fury. "Jackson, that module changes everything. Get copies of those images to me and the county recorder immediately. We need subpoenas for Meridian's contracts and any payment trails to the HOA. If Meridian is financing this, there's a paper chain somewhere. We'll trace bank transfers, consultants, anything." We started the hard work. Marion filed emergency motions, asking the court to compel the HOA and Meridian to turn over contracts, invoices, and communications. She also filed a request with the county to freeze any recent amendments while they reviewed the annexation paperwork. I met with the county clerk and explained what I'd found. She agreed to flag the files and to prioritize my case. It felt like gouging light into a dark den. Next, I reached out to a local reporter I'd seen at town meetings, Leah Morris, a young investigative journalist with a habit of poking at the things powerful people want left alone. I emailed her the pictures and the timeline. The trench appears. Overnight, forged documents surface. A notary on the HOA board notarizes the fake amendment. Industrial-grade pipe with Meridian hardware is installed. Her reply came back in 15 minutes. "I'm on my way." When Leah pulled up, she had that hungry look the one reporters get when they smell a story that could make someone squirm. We walked the trench together. She took notes, snapped photos, and asked sharp, direct questions that made my jaw tighten because they were the right ones. "Who notarized the amendment?" she asked. "Who benefited financially? Where did the money come from?" I told her about Brenda Holcomb and Cassandra Pike and the demand letter for $75,000. Leah's eyes narrowed. "This sounds systemic. Not just an HOA overreach and organized land capture. She promised to run a background check on Meridian and the HOA's recent finances. Within a day, she flagged a curious pattern, a string of payments from a shell account linked to Meridian that coincided with annexation amendments across 3 properties in the county. It wasn't definitive by itself, but stacked against the forged signatures and the industrial hardware, the pattern became an accusation in plain sight. Marion took the lead on the legal front. She served subpoenas to Meridian Grid for any contracts with Redwood Hills HOA and for bank records showing transfers to HOA accounts. She also demanded a list of subcontractors, engineering plans, and permits Meridian claimed to possess. Meridian's lawyer responded with the usual corporate politeness and a lot of stalling requests for extensions, claims of privileged communications, technicalities about redactions. They acted like a fortress, trying to slow a leak. Meanwhile, I hired a handwriting expert on Marion's recommendation. I met the analyst in a small office, lined with books and samples of signatures, the kind of place you'd expect to find the sort of people who can tell a person's tremor from a forgery. She examined my genuine signature, the one on my deed, and compared it to the signature on the amendment. "This isn't the same hand," she said, pointing to differences in the pressure, the slanted loops, the way certain letters closed. "This is a forgery. It's clumsy, someone copied the look but not the movement." I felt a rush. Validation, yes, but also the weight of danger. Forgeries like that point to intention, not mistake. Someone deliberately manufactured consent. At the same time, Marion filed for a forensic accounting order. We were looking for the money trail that Leah's reporting had hinted at. The accountants dug through HOA bank statements and Meridian's vendor lists. Within days, they uncovered a lump sum payment labeled infrastructure consulting that went from Meridian to a little-known HOA reserve fund. The amounts and dates lined up too neatly with the annexation filings. It was a map of motive. One late afternoon, I got a call from Leah. "Jackson, I dug up an email chain between a Meridian exec and a consultant working with Redwood Hills," she said, her voice low. "There's language in there, ensure easement acquisition, and a line about keeping community outreach minimal." She read me a paragraph that made my skin crawl. "We'll use HOA jurisdiction to formalize corridors and secure rights of way. The residents will think it's for safety." It was a smoking gun in plain text. That evening, with the injunction motion pending and the subpoenas served, things escalated in a new way. Brenda Holcomb, the notary, began sending terse emails through her HOA account, defensive, legalistic, but oddly human, in places where she slipped and mentioned fear of losing reputation and of personal financial ruin if the project failed. I printed those emails. They revealed cracks. People who flourish in shadows will sometimes leave fingerprints when they panic. But there was also danger in that panic. The more we pulled, the more visible the conspiracy became and the more flailing the other side got. Trucks roared by later that week with less subtlety, dragging cables and leaving fresh tracks, as if to remind me that while the court processes moved in slow motion, they could always act in the here and now. I continued to photograph and record to inventory every interaction, every paper, and every engine that growled near my gate. In a move Marion called strategic, she prepared subpoenas for bank records linked to HOA board members, including Brenda and Cassandra. The idea was not only to trace Meridian's payments, but to see if kickbacks had reached individual pockets. If they had, the case would stop being a mere property dispute and become a criminal matter: fraud, conspiracy, maybe even racketeering, if the pattern extended across multiple properties. I won't pretend I wasn't afraid. When you pull on a thread that runs into the fabric of a powerful network, the risk of unraveling is personal. I slept with the phone beside my bed, the screensaver, a looping image of the trench reminder and fuel. But fear sharpened everything. It made me meticulous. It made me persistent. One sunny afternoon, Leah called again with an update that made my stomach drop with relief and dread all at once. Meridian's PR department issued a bland statement distancing themselves from Redwood Hills. No direct contractual relationship. Yet their emails and the junction box bore their logo, and their bank transfers showed a ghostly trail through intermediary firms. Their denial was a classic play disavow delay and hope the storm passes. But the storm wasn't passing. It was gathering force. The county had flagged the annexation for investigation. Marion had motions ready to present to the judge, showing forgery, trespass, and a data line masked as a gas conduit. Leah's article was scheduled to run with all the documentation we'd gathered. The community, once sleepy and divided, was waking up. At the edge of it all, standing beside the trench with dirt under my nails and a photocopy of the forensic analysis in my pocket, I felt oddly calm. The fight had widened, but so had the circle of light. We had a paper trail, eyewitness accounts, a journalist willing to publish, and a lawyer who never flinched. The HOA's veneer of respectability was cracking. They had chosen their battlefield. I had chosen mine, and I was no longer alone. The article broke on a Wednesday morning. Leah's headline in the Redwood County Gazette screamed across the front page. Forged signatures, secret pipelines, HOA land grab tied to Meridian grid. It was bold, sharper than I expected, and it lit a fire under the entire town. By noon, my phone buzzed nonstop, neighbors, strangers, even distant relatives calling to say they'd seen my name in the paper. Some were angry at the HOA, some frightened of what it meant, but most offered support. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel like a lone voice shouting into the wind. But with attention came risk. That afternoon, a letter arrived at my mailbox without a return address. Inside was a single typed sheet: "Withdraw your claims or you'll regret it. Some fights aren't worth dying over." No signature, no logo, just naked threat. I carried it inside, snapped photos, and forwarded it to Marion. When I called her, my voice shook with restrained anger. "Intimidation," she said flatly. "Typical. Good you kept the letter. We'll add it to the harassment file. Every attempt they make to scare you only strengthens our case." Still, her reassurance didn't erase the icy knot in my gut. Threats on paper were one thing. Headlights circling my property at night were another. But this letter made it personal. They weren't just trying to seize land, they were trying to break me. That evening, Franklin dropped by with 2 other landowners, a couple named Joe and Marla. They looked tired, beaten down, but their eyes burned with the same fury I felt. Over coffee at my workshop, Joe told me how the HOA fined him for landscaping violations until he finally sold 2 acres just to escape the harassment. Marla shook her head bitterly. "We thought we were the only ones." Reading the paper today now, we know we weren't crazy. I laid out the documents on my workbench, the forged signature, the photos of the trench, the Meridian junction box. "They've been playing the same game for years," I said. "But they made a mistake with me. I'm not backing down." One by one they signed affidavits. Marion had prepared swearing to their experiences. Each story echoed the same pattern: intimidation, bogus fines, forged amendments. By the time they left, the weight of community was finally on my side. What was once a private battle was morphing into something larger, a coalition. The next day, Marion and I met at the courthouse to submit the affidavits along with our emergency motion. The hearing was set for the following week. Until then, the judge's temporary injunction barred any construction on my land. But we knew the HOA wouldn't obey quietly. Sure enough, 2 nights later, floodlights blazed across my meadow. I rushed outside, phone in hand, and saw workers hauling equipment toward the trench, their trucks parked brazenly along the road. I shouted over the roar of engines, "You're in contempt of court. I have the order right here." One man sneered without looking up. "We're just following instructions." I filmed everything: the floodlights, the trucks, the men unloading pipe. Then, just as I thought they'd ignore me entirely, a familiar voice called out from the shadows. "Mr. Cole." It was Cassandra Pike, striding toward the trench, in jeans and a crisp button-down shirt. Even dressed casually, she radiated arrogance. "You're wasting your time. The project will proceed. The community depends on it." I held my phone steady, recording. "You've trespassed, forged my name, and violated a court order. The only thing depending on this is Meridian's profit margin." Her smile froze. "Careful with accusations you can't prove." "Oh, I can prove it," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Your notary board member forged my signature. I've got a forensic expert to back it up, and I've got your emails with Meridian." For the first time, her mask cracked. Her eyes narrowed. "You think you can fight us? We have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, money, influence." I lowered my phone slightly, stepping closer. "Then you underestimated one thing: a man protecting his land." We stood there, the hum of generators filling the silence. Finally, she turned, snapped at the workers to pack up, and left in a huff. I knew it wasn't surrender, it was retreat, temporary and tactical. The following morning, Marion nearly exploded when she saw the footage. "This is gold," she said. Contempt of court on camera admissions, and Cassandra herself present at the site. "The judge won't ignore this." And she was right. At the hearing, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Marion presented our evidence methodically: the forged signature, the forensic report, the junction box stamped with Meridian's logo, the video of Cassandra overseeing workers in defiance of the injunction. One by one, the pieces stacked up until the judge leaned back with a scowl that said he'd seen enough. Until further review, the judge declared all construction is halted. Any violation will result in fines and potential criminal liability. A murmur rippled through the room. Cassandra sat stiffly beside her lawyers, her face pale but eyes still sharp. Meridian's representative wasn't even in the room, preferring to send statements through their attorneys. Cowards. It was a win, but a fragile one. Walking out of the courthouse, Marion put a hand on my shoulder. You've bought time. But this isn't the end. Meridian has deep pockets. They'll drag this out. Appeal bury you in motions. You need to prepare for a long haul. I nodded. I was ready. But what neither of us knew was that the HOA and Meridian weren't preparing for court, they were preparing for another strike. 2 nights later, as I sat in my living room, sorting documents, a low hum rattled the window panes. I stepped outside and saw headlights creeping once more along my property line. But this time it wasn't just 1 or 2 vehicles. It was a convoy, 6 trucks, engines, low lights dimmed, moving like predators, testing the fence. They didn't stop, didn't speak, just circled before vanishing into the night. The message was clear. The battlefield wasn't just the courtroom anymore. They wanted to break me through fear. But fear works both ways. With Leah's article spreading, neighbors joining the fight, and the court order in place, I knew the HOA was cornered. And cornered animals lash out before they fall. I tightened the locks on my gates, checked the batteries on my cameras, and sat back at the table with one thought burning through the haze. If they wanted a war, then Redwood County was about to see one. The courthouse steps were buzzing with reporters by the time Marion and I walked out for the next hearing. Leah's article had caught fire, spreading beyond Redwood County to regional outlets. Suddenly, what had started as an HOA squabble looked like a corporate scandal in the making. TV cameras swung in my direction, microphones thrust forward. Mr. Cole, is it true the HOA forged your signature? Do you believe Meridian Grid is secretly funding the project? Are you afraid for your safety after the threats? I kept my voice calm but firm. This isn't just about me. It's about every landowner who's been bullied and lied to. Yes, my signature was forged. Yes, evidence ties Meridian to this so-called community project. And no, I'm not afraid. Because fear is exactly what they're counting on. The next hour inside the courtroom felt like the climax of a movie I hadn't chosen to star in. Marion stood tall, her voice precise, hammering every point. She called the handwriting expert who testified with charts and comparisons that my alleged signature was an amateur forgery. She entered Franklin's affidavit into the record, then Joe and Marla's. Each story painted the HOA, not as a benevolent community body, but as a predator picking off landowners. Then Marion introduced the photographs of the junction box with Meridian's logo. She spoke slowly, letting the words hang in the air. This is not a gas line. This is infrastructure of another kind installed under false pretenses on private land. It is trespass, it is fraud, and it is a deliberate conspiracy. Cassandra Pike sat with her attorneys at the defense table, her posture ramrod straight, her expression neutral, but her hands trembled slightly as she shuffled papers. And then came the moment that cracked her polished shell. Marion requested that Brenda Holcomb, the notary board member, take the stand. Brenda approached her heels, clicking against the tile, her face stiff. Marion's questions were simple, at first procedural, harmless. You notarized Mr. Cole's signature on the annexation amendment, correct? Yes, Brenda answered, her voice clipped. Were you present when Mr. Cole signed the document? Yes. Marion raised a single eyebrow. Interesting. Because on the date listed Mr. Cole's bank records and phone data place him out of the county entirely. Can you explain that discrepancy? A hush fell over the room. Brenda's lips parted, but no words came. She stammered, glanced toward Cassandra, then muttered, I must have mixed up the dates. Marion's tone sharpened. Isn't it true you are both a notary and an HOA board member, that you stood to gain financially from annexations like this? Brenda's face flushed. I know, I was just following instructions. The courtroom buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously. The judge leaned forward. Answer directly, Miss Holcomb. Did you personally witness Mr. Cole sign that amendment? Brenda swallowed hard. No, I did not. Gasps erupted across the gallery. Cassandra's jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might crack. It was the break we needed. Marion pressed the advantage, presenting the subpoenaed bank records, showing Meridian transfers to a slush account tied to the HOA. The timing lined up exactly with the annexation filings. The defense scrambled, arguing that the HOA acted in good faith, that the payments were for consulting, that Brenda's slip of the tongue was misremembering. But the damage was done. Even the judge's tone turned cold. This court will not tolerate forgery, fraud, or violations of injunctions. An investigation into the HOA's financial dealings is hereby ordered. All construction activity on Mr. Cole's property is permanently barred until resolution. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the sight of Cassandra glaring at me across the courtroom, her eyes like daggers. She wasn't finished. Outside, the cameras swarmed again. Marion shielded me with her arm as reporters shouted questions. Leah approached quietly, recorder in hand. "Jackson off the record, Meridian won't take this lying down. They've got ties in state politics. You need to be ready." That night, the weight of victory felt strangely heavy. Yes, we had forced an investigation. Yes, Brenda had cracked under oath. But power like Meridian's doesn't evaporate under a single spotlight. They'd regroup, retaliate. I knew it in my bones. Back at the ranch, I walked the perimeter with my flashlight, the cool night air sharp against my face. My land stretched out quiet and scarred, the trench still visible, though idle. I thought about my father, who taught me that land is more than dirt, it's legacy. "Guard it," he'd said once. "Guard it like you guard your own blood." I looked at the dark outline of my workshop, the greenhouse beyond the fields that had once been my peace and were now my battlefield. And I whispered into the night, a promise to myself: "You tried to steal my land. You tried to buy me, to break me, to scare me. But you forgot one thing. This land is mine, and I don't scare easy." The headlights didn't come that night. No SUVs prowled the edge of my meadow. Maybe the court order had slowed them, maybe the public scrutiny made them hesitate, or maybe they were simply waiting for the storm to calm before striking again. I didn't care. Because for the first time since the trench appeared, I knew I had them cornered. And cornered enemies are the most dangerous of all. The days following the courtroom clash felt almost unreal. For months I had lived in a state of siege every sunrise, bringing new threats every night, haunted by headlights crawling along my fences. But after Brenda cracked on the stand, and the judge ordered a financial investigation, the meadow was suddenly silent. No trucks, no workers, no orange flags. For the first time since the nightmare began, the only sounds were whined through the pines and the distant bark of coyotes. It should have felt like peace. Instead, it felt like the pause between storms. Restoration crews hired at the HOA's expense by court order arrived a week later to fill the trench. I watched them from my porch, arms folded, while bulldozers pushed dirt back into the gash that had split my land. The men worked quickly, avoiding my gaze like they were ashamed to be there. When they left, the field was scarred but whole again. My sanctuary was healing, yet the raw wound in my trust remained. Marion called that evening with news that made me lean against the wall for balance. Jackson, the state attorney's office, has taken an interest. With Brenda's testimony and the financial records tying Meridian to the HOA, they're considering criminal charges. Fraud, conspiracy, even racketeering. This isn't just civil anymore, it's criminal. I let out a long breath. So Cassandra and her board, they're exposed, Marion said. But don't think they'll fold quietly. Men like Meridian's executives have lawyers who treat courtrooms like casinos. They'll gamble until the last chip. Sure enough, a week later, Cassandra resigned publicly, citing health reasons in a bland letter mailed to every homeowner. But behind the scenes, Leah reported that she was negotiating a deal to cooperate with investigators in exchange for leniency. She had once stood in my field with that smug smile, telling me to tread carefully. Now she was the one treading water, fighting not to drown. Meridian Grid, for its part, tried to distance itself. They issued press releases dripping with corporate doublespeak. Meridian is committed to community improvement. Meridian has no knowledge of impropriety. Meridian respects all landowner rights. But Leah's follow-up article shredded their denials. She leaked emails proving Meridian executives encouraged the HOA to fast-track easements and minimize community backlash. The words community backlash hit me like a punch. To them, people like me weren't citizens. We were obstacles to be managed. Neighbors began stopping by my property, some with pies, others with handshakes, most with stories. A woman named Carol described how the HOA fined her for unapproved roofing materials until she sold her home at a loss. A widower named Hank confessed he had been threatened with foreclosure after missing 2 months of dues. Each tale was a shard of the same broken mirror: control, through fear, profit, through intimidation. I realized my fight had become more than personal. It had become a beacon. People were looking to me not just as the man who fought the HOA, but as proof that standing your ground could matter. One evening, Franklin and I sat on my porch watching the sunset blaze across the sky. He took a slow sip of coffee and said, "Jackson, you did what most of us only dreamed of. You stood up to them and lived to tell it." I shook my head. I just didn't have the sense to back down. He chuckled. "That's the difference. Some call it stubbornness. I call it backbone." Weeks passed, and the investigation deepened. Subpoenas uncovered years of shady annexations, fraudulent signatures and payments flowing through shell companies. Brenda was indicted for forgery. Cassandra, facing her own charges, agreed to testify against Meridian executives. The once mighty HOA board crumbled its meetings, reduced to skeleton attendance, its reputation shredded. Yet victory tasted bittersweet. My land still bore the faint scar of the trench. My workshop, once a place of peace, now carried the echoes of long nights spent scanning threats. Even as I sanded oak and polished walnut, part of me remained on edge, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Leah visited one last time to interview me for her follow-up piece. She asked what I had learned through it all. I looked past her to the meadow golden in the evening light and said, "That land is more than property. It's memory, sweat, sacrifice. And the moment you let someone trample it, you've lost more than dirt, you've lost yourself." Her recorder clicked off. She smiled softly. "That's the line, Jackson. That's the truth people need to hear." Now, months later, as I sit on my porch with the sun setting low, I finally feel the weight lifting. The trench is gone, the orange flag's a memory. My neighbors nod at me with respect. Marion still calls with updates. Meridian executives indicted HOA board members, testifying the system grinding forward slowly but surely. I know the war isn't fully over. Corporations like Meridian don't vanish. HOAs don't surrender their thirst for control. But I also know this: when they came for me, I stood, and that stand lit a fire others could see. That, I think, is the real victory. Not just saving my land, but proving that ordinary people armed with truth and grit can push back against power. And as I watch the last light fade over Redwood County, I whisper the same vow I made that first night when I saw the trench. This land is mine, and it always will be. This battle taught me something deeper than property lines or forged signatures. It showed me how fragile freedom can be when we assume others will respect it. The HOA didn't need guns or chains. They used paperwork, intimidation, and lies. And for too long, good people stayed silent. But silence is permission. The moment you raise your voice, you discover others ready to stand beside you. So to anyone watching, don't underestimate your power. Whether it's land, dignity, or peace of mind, protect it. Fight for it. Because once you let it slip, it may never return. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare, a bully, or a system stacked against you, share your story in the comments. Let's make sure no one feels alone in this fight. And if you found strength in mine, hit that subscribe button, because more stories are coming, and together we'll shine light where others want shadows.